Was there a moment where you knew this helping people, being in the helping profession, was what I wanted to do?
Absolutely. I was a junior in high school and I was working in the cafeteria. I'm from Pennsylvania, so I was working at Holy Spirit Hospital and I was in the dietary department. And um, there's some like threads to this story. There had been a young man who I had been connecting with, and it was interesting because he was actually from, if you will, the other side of the tracks. So I grew up, for those in the Indianapolis area, I grew up in what would be considered Greenwood.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Lived on the west shore of Harrisburg, which sometimes was also called the White Shore. So very suburban, middle class, homogenous. I grew up in a strong Catholic community. So my friend and I we would go into Harrisburg. So it'd be like going into Indianapolis, and they had this thing that they called driving the circuit.
Mm-hmm.
And you would just drive around, and then you would honk at people and you'd wave them, and you'd stand on the side, and then you would connect with them, right? Talk with them.
Oh, cool.
And that would be considered dangerous now.
Right.
But, how many years ago was that? What, 45 years ago, something like that?
Right.
It's what we did. So, when we would go over there, usually on the weekends, my friend and I, Louise, because she drove, I wasn't driving them. So, connected with Richie. So we'd meet up with him and just hang out. I mean, it's just what you did. It was kind of like going to the mall whenever some kids used to go to the mall.
Okay.
So he was troubled, right? And so was his environment. Another story to this is that there was one point when we were hanging out downtown. I think my friend and I were downtown, and then he zipped down and said, "You got to come with me now." And his friend Steve, the dad or the stepdad, like all of a sudden, I find myself standing on the side of this crime scene because it was a murder suicide.
Oh my gosh.
The dad had shot the mom, and the kids ran across the roof and jumped off. And so Steve was Richie's friend. And so I'm standing there just completely like out of body experience. Like,
Yeah.
I shouldn't be here, and this is not my world, like at all. So that type of troubled. I had no sense of truly what he endured, right? But then even in that moment, and that was not the moment, but in that moment, at some point I said, like, we got to leave. Like, you got to get me back downtown so I can get in a car and go home, like
Yeah.
into my little safe protected pocket. So that was his world. So then he ended up enlisting in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm working, my middle class world life. And at one point, it would have been months and months later after he'd gone in the Navy. Up to that point, I was a STEM brain. As a freshman in high school, I was taking trigonometry and analytics and was thinking about becoming, like, that was back in like 1979. I was a freshman. I was thinking about doing like computers and data analysis before it was a thing.
Right.
So I was looking at like MIT and Clemson and just some of those schools. Like, I really had no idea, but I just loved math, and that's what I wanted to do. But this one particular evening, I'm working at the hospital. I'm pushing trays after they had come down from the rooms. We had to take them off this like tray and then wheel the cart back into the dietary where we loaded them. So I go past the emergency room and I look over, and probably 10 or 15 feet in front of me, there stands Richie after trying to take his life. And in that moment, and I was and remain a very strong faith-filled individual, right? Faith really guides my life. but in that moment, I said, like, God intervened into what I was going to do. And I said, I want to help people before they get to that point. So from that point on, I then began to be guided into social work. And that was from my one brother, Tony. Whenever I told him what I wanted to do, um, he said, social work is a well-known career field. And so that's what I went to Penn State for. Um, but that was a divergent path from what I had anticipated doing at all.
Wow.
It was, it was just a different lifetime back then.
Can I ask a personal question? It's so interesting. I had never heard the first part of the story, which was this like grisly scene that you'd seen, you'd experienced. Didn't any part of you feel like a little guilty? Like, what if I had talked to him more? What if I reached out? Like, was I just retreating to my suburban bubble, and was that not like the right thing to do?
That's a great question. I don't know. I don't know if there was any sense of guilt or regret. There was just this. I was very aware of this chasm between our worlds. And so, probably in my very narrow-minded, protected world and mind, it didn't surprise me in some regard. I do remember afterwards, so on the unit in the hospital, they called it the mental health unit. So I remember going up there, probably after shift or something, because I still remember just sitting in my uniform, and somebody came out, and obviously there was privacy, so they couldn't tell me anything, but I just remember sitting there just kind of being bewildered. Probably bewildered was really my experience. And we didn't necessarily stay connected after that. Although, I mean, he holds a profound place in my life and in my heart because of that. And it was just this bewilderment of this is how people live. And I don't know that I thought this word then, but we talk about the imposter syndrome. So kind of felt like an imposter in his world, right? And when I started working in the field, so this was a moment that kept me in the field. My brother, Tony, who's the one who said, hey, go ahead and like go into social work. But then he also said, start volunteering because you're going to need experience for your resume.
Tony has good advice.
Tony has very good advice. Yeah. He's a great guy. He was one of my mentors through life. So I started volunteering. This one organization called Gadenzia had about 13 different facilities in Pennsylvania, different places. So I just like reached out. My activator, right? My strategic activator said, okay, well, I'll call. And the first place I called was called Common Ground. And that was a 30-day facility for people dealing with addiction, or excuse me, alcoholism. So I called, and I forget the gentleman who I connected with, but he said, we have multiple facilities. So what we could do is kind of rotate you through each one. Because I just said, hey, I want to volunteer, and hey, I want to learn. He's like, all right. So I go, I do my stint at Common Ground. As I look back now, it's kind of like, I don't remember much about it.
Yeah. Well, it might be because of the name Common Ground.
Right.
You know, it's like a cool community organization, but also a great name for like a discount coffee company.
That's funny. I think they meant it more in finding common ground around people who are recovering.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
that makes more sense.
Right. But then my next stop was Concept 90, which was a 90-day residential facility. And that was actually, and I believe they still are in operation, on what used to be the state hospital grounds in Harrisburg, because Harrisburg had a state hospital.
Okay, yeah.
So they were renting a building. So I go up there, 90-day residential facility. And that also really kind of increased my sense of bewilderment because um, I was sitting with Donald. So I was 19 at the time, right? And probably what you would call the white savior complex. I mean, not that I thought that I was going to save them, but here I was, this like white, non-recovering person. I grew up in an alcoholic family. My mom was an alcoholic. She got into AA when I was 4 in 1969, and she took her last drink in 1978. So, yeah, and more on that story in future conversations, because there's always mother issues, right?
Always.
So, so I go to Common Ground. Donald is this, and again, my world was very white. Donald is this big black guy, like just with a deep voice, kind of like a James Earl Jones. And I just immediately kind of fell in love with him. He had had decades of recovery from heroin addiction, had spent 17 years of his life in prison, which, so I'm sitting, and he just took me under his wing, and I just began to sit and watch and observe and just absorb everything.
Yeah, because this guy's got some serious life experience.
Oh my gosh. And the people that were coming to Concept 90, most of the people were from the legal system. And I remember talking with Luther, who, when I was doing his, initial mental health interview, found out he had been in jail for murder. And and I didn't feel scared. It was, and I remember going, so, like, here's naive me. I'm like, so you're not still in prison? And Luther goes, well, he goes, actually, the average amount of time that people spend in jail for murder is 7 years. Now, I didn't fact check that, but I was like, oh, didn't know that.
Yep.
So then I remember sitting in with Donald, and he was interviewing Bev. And, like, again, I grew up very protected white Catholic. And he says to Bev, what drugs were you using? And she told him, and he's like, did you ever inject in your arm? I'm sure he used a more street language for that.
Yeah, colloquial language she was familiar with.
So I'm sitting there, and then he says, how'd you get your drugs? And follows up with, did you ever prostitute yourself? I nearly fell out of my chair. And then when she said yes, I was just like, oh my God, like, this is so unfamiliar to me.
Yeah.
And so then I began to just have my doubts. And I remember saying to Donald, I don't know if it was within the first couple weeks or the first month, I have no idea. But he obviously saw something in me, which I deeply love him for that. But I said, I don't know if I can do this. And he said, why not? And I said, because I'm not an addict. I haven't gone through what they've gone through. Like, this is completely foreign to me.
What were you feeling in that moment? That can you talk a little bit more about that feeling of sort of being an imposter? Was it just too much?
It was the fear of not being able to relate to them or have them be able to relate to me. Like, I wasn't sitting in judgment of them. I just thought, how am I going to do this when this is not my world? I don't know anything about it. I haven't lived this way. I've never done or even heard some of the things that were described. And he just looked at me and said, can you feel pain? And I said, yeah. And he goes, do you need cancer to work with cancer patients? And I go, No. And he said, pain is pain, and that's where you connect with people. And in my very logical STEM gifted brain, I was like, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have to have gone through everything. There are some ways that that really helps people, right? Like, even I talk to people, especially with the trauma work that I do, especially with AFSP and survivors of suicide loss. There is something about looking in the eye of another person who has gone through a similar tragedy and know that they know the depth of that pain, whether it's suicide loss, whether it's overdose loss, whether it's pancreatic cancer, whether it's divorce, right?
Yeah.
There's beauty in connecting, but it wasn't necessary in order to be effective. And that's what Donald gave me. And then so much so because the plan was that I was supposed to rotate through the other Gadenzia facilities. And he's like, no. So
Staying
he
right
kept
here.
me. I stayed there. I eventually got a paid position as the house manager. And probably by the time I graduated from college, had like 2.5, 3 years of related work experience in the field from the volunteer and the paid experience. So
that seems like it's really shaped you.
oh, yeah. Here's another thing, just random thought that came to my mind.
Yeah.
As a house manager, I would take people to like doctor's appointments and stuff like that. And there was this one gentleman who, again, he was an addict. And again, we're talking hardcore drugs. They were using heroin, cocaine, meth.
Heavy stuff.
Heavy stuff. Yeah. And Melvin, I took him to the doctor. He had a back issue, and the doctor had said he couldn't, lift certain weight or anything like that. And at that point, they would rotate through jobs in the house, and so he was in charge of the kitchen, and they were unloading some boxes or something like that. And I looked over, and I don't know if he was trying to get somebody else to pick up a box or whatever. And I said, well, actually, Melvin can't pick that box up because of his back. And he just looked up at me and he's like, you remembered, which seemed like perfectly logical to me, but in a world where they dismiss their body, hurt their body, don't tend to their body, it just seemed like a moment of like appreciation that he had. And so those were those moments that I was like, okay, I can do this. You know?
His eyes soften. He goes, wow, you actually remembered.
I know. Yeah. Like somebody cared about me.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is kind of sad though, because it shows how low the bar is, right?
Yeah.
If that was a unique experience for him.
Right.
But that's such an interesting idea. I've actually never heard it phrased that way. It seems like what your mentor was teaching you was, even though there's a uniqueness, like a unique element to pain, it's almost more universal than it is particular.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to sit with that for a long time. I think that's totally true though.
Yeah.
Huh.
It's how we can be effective in therapy with, people who aren't married can still be good marital therapists, and people who don't have kids can still be good family therapists, and people who, aren't addicts. I'm not an addict, although I'm a licensed clinical addictions counselor, and I work with people in recovery and have learned that world. And, so it gives us the opportunity and the grace to be able to serve without having, because it's not practical to have lived through every life experience. And that's your one qualifier, right?
Right. My one qualifier is that I want someone who has the exact experience that I have, who's been to the same places, had the same things happen to them. It's like, well, that's just you.
Exactly.
So that's a problem.
Right. Yeah. You let me know if you find another you.
Yeah, exactly. That's so funny. So I think you talked about this a little bit, but I'm curious, were there any sort of broad misconceptions you had about what it was like being a practitioner before you got in?
So back in my day, when I got out of college, so I
Yeah.
had my BSW.
Mm.
At that point, the addictions world, because that's what brought me to Indiana, working for Koala Hospital, which at the time was a drug and alcohol facility. It was a private for profit drug and alcohol facility. So I moved from Pennsylvania to South Bend. And that was actually via New Mexico. I made a stop in New Mexico and then found my way back here. So I lived in South Bend and then worked in Plymouth, which is where the Koala Adolescent Center was.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I gotta tell you that story too. That gets back to Cadenzia. That was funny. So yeah, let me tell you this story.
Yeah.
So one of the first, actually, when I first interviewed with Donald,
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, because he was, and I was obviously very young, and there were a lot of men, and not that I would say in any stretch that they were predators, but again, that world, right? I think
Right.
things would get sexualized, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So Donald said to me, in terms of bringing me on, he goes, I just need to let you know, if you fuck them, I fire you. Which again, completely out of my realm, like completely out of my realm. And I looked.
That wasn't on the interview questionnaire
No,
that they gave him.
And I looked at him and I said, straight, and this is probably when he fell in love with me.
Mm-hmm.
I go, I'm not going to fuck him, so you won't have to fire me. Like, so there was this boldness that I had, which, you know, it's probably served me for better, for worse over the decades. So fast forward, I'm going for my first interview at Koala. You know, now I've been at Gadenzia. I had been there like 2.5, 3 years. Get out of college, spend the summer in New Mexico, find my way and interview with Koala Hospital. And so I'm meeting with Michelle Pappy. She was my first supervisor, who was lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Donald was my first supervisor. But, and I'm trying to think if it was in a one-on-one interview. It might have even been a group interview with the adolescent team, because that team was really strong. And so Michelle posed the question, because by that time I would have been 22, 23.
Mm-hmm.
And I was applying for an adolescent position. So some of those teens were 15, 16, 17. And she's like, you know, how do you feel about that age and the fact that, you know, how they may view you and, you know, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
And I said, well, I go, as I said to Donald, because I think I was talking about that experience, I said, you know, I won't fuck him, so you won't have to fire me. And so when I went home that night,
Uh-huh.
and it was sharing, like, they're like, how'd the interview go? I go, I think I got the job.
I aced it.
I used the F word, and they loved it. So, you know, so.
Man, I wish I could be in the 70s and 80s. Man.
Oh,
It sounds like such a fun time.
Right, you can't say that these days. So that was, yeah, it was a beautiful thing. So now I think on our team, that was a time in the world, especially in the addictions world, where the majority of staff were recovering folks.
Mm.
So if you were non-recovering, in some ways you were a second class citizen, but you
weren't in the club.
Right. And you didn't have the life experience. So like you really couldn't.
Yeah. There was a valid reason.
Right,
maybe
exactly.
That you weren't. Yeah.
Right. So, and I had come in, at that point we were doing like primary therapy as bachelor's levels, like because academia had not hit yet. Like the mandate for people need to be having a master's.
Right.
So this goes back to you asking, like, what were some of the misperceptions or at the time? So one of the ways we used to judge like a good therapy session, and I say we, but maybe it was just me, but I kind of had the feel, was whether somebody cried in a session or whether somebody broke down in a group.
Uh-huh.
Like that's how you judge. This was a really good session. And I think about that now and I'm like, that's kind of irrelevant. But I mean, if it happens, it happens.
Like, so if you were a hard son of a bitch and you made everyone cry, you were a great therapist.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
It was. It was. It was very funny.
So yeah, I think we're probably getting a little low on time here,
Uh-huh.
like coming near the end. But we've talked about a lot of stuff today. I'm curious, is there a question you want to ask based on the things that you've said today? You've talked a little bit about your journey. You've talked about your supervisor, some experiences you've had. You've talked about the difference between what you thought therapy was going to be like and what the reality was. Kind of hit you like a truck
Mm-hmm.
in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give to that younger version of yourself? If you could go back now, before you've had any of those experiences, back when you were still in that in white suburbia, white sheltered suburbia, what would you say to yourself?
Somebody else had asked me this question just more recently, and um, I don't know that I have a good answer because, and you've heard me say this. I mean, you've heard me say this 100,000 times, and probably by the time we are no longer in each other's lives, it'll be a million times. But I truly believe that things happen when they should, as they should. So I didn't necessarily feel ill equipped. I really just felt as though things were unfolding and I was learning what I needed to learn. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it would just be a confirmation of just like stay with that. Like, I don't remember that I would get jammed up about a lot of stuff, but
You don't seem like the type, frankly.
yeah. But I do know that my younger self used to push and drive things harder
Mm.
towards an outcome. And I don't know how I floated into, I think it's the Buddhist Catholic in me,
Mm-hmm.
that things just happen as they should, as they should. And my firm belief is that divine providence's hand is ever present.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever that higher power or divine providence is for you, the hand of God is ever present, the sacred in every walk, in every exchange. And so it may have just been like, just stay with that and, don't get so jammed up
Mm.
during the times when I did get jammed up and fired up and like, it's really okay.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's powerful. Let it be, right?
yeah, yeah. As I don't know if you know who Doris Day is, but
Mm.
there's the Doris Day show, and my mom loved watching it.
It was probably before my time.
Oh, absolutely, it was before your time. And she would sing "Que sera, sera." Whatever will be, will be. The future is ours to see. Que sera, sera. And maybe that metacognition just got in my brain because I was exposed to that as a young kid. So, yeah, que sera, sera.
Amen. I think that's a great place to end. Thanks so much for talking with me today.
You're welcome. I look forward to future conversations.